Welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie Spiker.
And I'm Candace Wierzbowski.
Today we're talking to Krystal Snyder. She is a horticulture extension agent at Penn State, and she specializes in plant nutrition, greenhouse floriculture, and hydroponic crop production. So, Candace, are you a green thumb?
You know what? I try really hard to be. My grandmother on my mom's side is very much into gardening. I don't know if she's technically a master gardener as defined by Penn State, but she has mastered gardening. And so I try really hard, but I am never going to live up to her standards. Not that she's like imposing them on me, but I would like my garden to look like hers. And sometimes things turn out really nice, and sometimes they turn out really terribly. I have been fighting a losing battle to try and grow decent carrots for the last 4 summers, and I think I'm gonna have to go a different direction because they keep coming out super stubbly.
Yeah, I actually got to talk to your grandma a few weeks ago for a story I wrote about Valentine's Day, and she gave me some nice flower tips, so that was very exciting. And yeah, she definitely knows what she's talking about. However, I could probably use some help in the garden department. I have tried vegetable gardening many times. I have failed many times. I do a little better with flowers than I do with vegetables. And you know what? That's fine because flowers are gorgeous, and who doesn't want to have flowers growing outside their house? So
very true. Very true. I feel like I get super excited every spring when I go to the greenhouse and I see all the beautiful petunias. I love petunias. And especially when we get like some really cool varieties like speckled kind or ones with stripes. And I end up spending so much more money than I think I'm going to because I have a hard time saying no to flowers.
I'm the same way. And Krystal actually works with Penn State on their flower trials. So I'm sure she can give us some, little tidbits about what's new in flowers so we can prepare for this upcoming spring season. So let's talk to Krystal and learn more about all things horticulture. Krystal Snyder, welcome to the Farmhouse. It's great to have you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
So we start each episode the same. We always ask one question to get it started for everyone. And that question is, did you always want to work in agriculture?
Actually, no. When I first went to college for my undergrad, I was a math education major. So I did have a hort minor, but I was a math education major, and I was like, I'm going to be a math teacher, and things changed.
At some point you pivoted.
Yes, I did. About my sophomore year in undergrad, I went to Del Val, that other ag school.
Yep.
And like I said, I had a hort minor, and the department chair was like, hey, I maybe should kind of think about coming over to our side. And I changed my major, and that was it. I did work at a greenhouse when I was in high school though. So I kind of had that background, but I had never planned for this to be my career.
I saw that in 2020 you were named to the Greenhouse Product News 40 Under 40 list. So congratulations. That's very exciting. And I was reading your bio on there, and it said that, you're a math major, but swayed to the quote, green side. So kind of what went into obviously the decision to switch from math and go and study horticulture? And then are there any ways that your math background comes in handy now that you're on the green side?
Yes. So I think I always had this love of plants, and, I was kind of wavering. I really wasn't happy with how math education was playing out in my college life, and was kind of unhappy. And then I was like, well, I'm going to move over. And I started to do that. And it was a really good fit for me, honestly. My major was actually fruit and vegetable production. So commercial fruit and vegetables. I did that for a little while. When I got out, I worked at an orchard, and actually funny, I swung back, and I was a building sub at our local high school for 5 years when I got out of college because I couldn't find a job.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to my dad one day, we were eating dinner, and he was like, maybe you should use that degree that I paid for. So it was a pivotal point of my life. And I was like, all right, I'm going to look for a job. And I ended up working for a fertilizer company. And that's really where I got into this plant nutrition, floriculture, green side of things. I kind of had left my vegetable background behind. And I use math every day, actually. like fertilizer calculations and like how many plants per acre and that kind of thing. I would have never guessed that that's where, like how it would all fit in. And I do a lot of work now with hydroponic growers, and that's really where that kind of stuff comes in, where I'm like, all right, well, you need to add this much iron to your 30,000 gallons. How much do I really need to figure out? So there's a lot of math involved, actually, more math than chemistry, to be honest.
Yeah, I feel like ag is one of those industries where you maybe don't expect that math is going to be so important to your life, but it definitely is. And even like for us as ag journalists, certain things we're writing about, there's math involved. And I have made the joke hundreds of times that like, I'm a writer, I don't like math, but there are definitely times where I have to do math to write an ag-based article. So it's there more than I think people think.
Same. I can't believe it.
Yeah, especially like if you're talking about like the ag side of like bushels per acre.
Yeah.
and like pricing and things like that. So
yeah, I'd be curious to know how many people outside of the, ag sphere understand just how like STEM related it actually is. Because I feel like it's not one of the industries you typically think of when you think of STEM careers.
Oh, it definitely isn't. I think a lot of, and it's funny, like sometimes folks will be like, oh, well, what do you do? And I explain it to them and they're like, oh, I didn't realize like those are the things that you do in ag. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things that you do work on is the Penn State flower trials, right? So I was wondering if you could explain what are the flower trials and what drew you into wanting to work on them?
Oh, so the flower trials. They are a really cool program that we have been running at Penn State actually since 1936. So a very, very long time. And what we do is we trial them at our Manheim location. We have a research farm in Manheim. And we usually trial about 1,000 varieties of plants a year, all mostly annuals, some perennials. And these are sent to us by breeders from all over the country. And the reason they send them to us, we're only one trial site. There's multiple, a lot of universities have them, even private growers, private companies have trial sites. And we do it for two reasons. Number one, we trial plants for these breeders because they want to see how things perform in the mid-Atlantic. So, they breed these plants in California and it's gorgeous weather and it's dry and it's fabulous, right? And then they send them all over. They send them to Colorado and to Texas and to Georgia and to us and all different places in between. And our weather isn't the same. So these plants perform the same, right? So it's really cool to see. And actually, it's really, really cool when I get to go to these other trial sites sometimes and see how those plants look there versus how they look for me.
I bet.
So we do that. That's like the big part of it. So those breeding companies then decide how they're like what they're going to market in our area. So they're like, oh, if this plant does really well in the Mid-Atlantic at the Penn State Flower Trials, we should probably consider putting that into our pushing that into our sales program. But if it doesn't perform well, maybe they'll trial it another year and see how things go. And then the second part of that is we have a really big field day every year. And at that field day, greenhouse growers, landscapers, people in the hort industry, they come to look at those plants to decide what they're going to put in their sales program for the next year, right? So like a greenhouse will come and be like, oh man, I really love that petunia. I think I want to make sure we sell that next year for our customers. Because that's the thing, like greenhouse growers want their customers to be successful. So at our trials, they can see how things perform here and, how successful they'll be. And the kind of cool thing is they're outside and the weather is so different every year. Like I remember the first year I got to Extension, we had like 64 inches of rain.
Oh my gosh.
And then this year we had an average of 2.25 inches for the summer. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was such a dry year.
So dry. So it's really, really cool to see how those plants perform. And a lot of breeders will send us plants multiple times, in a cycle. So maybe we'll have it for 3 or 4 years so they can see how it performs. And then our perennials, we actually trial them for 3 years, so we can see how they overwinter. So, how do they deal with this crazy weather patterns we've been having, right? Like some years we have lots and lots of snow, so it's super insulated. And then other years we have no snow and it's really dry, like last winter. And how many things can survive in that kind of environment. And how did I get involved in the flower trials? Actually, that's a really good question. So like I said, I worked for a fertilizer company, and I was on the flower trials has a board, an advisory board, and I had joined that advisory board in an industry capacity in 2012, I want to say. And I retained my seat for many years. And when I was looking to leave industry, I had actually said to the then trials director, Sinclair Adam, I was like, hey, I saw there's this extension job up by me, like, because I live in Northampton County. So like I'm about 2 hours from you all in Lancaster. And he was like, there is one. He was like, are you going to apply? And I was like, I think I might. So I applied, came to extension. And I still kept my seat on the board, but then I started to really help Sinclair do a lot of really cool things. Like we started this video series, and we were like upping our Instagram and doing fun things. And I love the flower trials. It's long been one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. And sadly, last April, Sinclair passed away very suddenly. And my boss at University Park calls me, and he was like, you have to do the flower trials. And I always said, okay.
Yikes.
This was in April.
Oh my gosh.
We had plants in the greenhouse. And I mean, thankfully, the CREC staff, that's the farm, it's called CREC. It's the Southeast Extension and Agricultural Research Center. And we've been trialing plants there since the 90s. The staff there is wonderful. Alyssa Collins is the director there. She knows how to do it. So she was like, we worked together, and us and a lot of master gardeners, and we made it happen. And we're doing it again in 2024. So plants will be showing up very soon.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. So coming out of 2023, what were some varieties that you particularly liked or got excited about that you think people maybe should start keeping an eye out for as they start, trickling into greenhouses nearby?
There was some really good stuff. So there was an Colocasia series, which is like elephant ears from Plants Nouveau. And we had 4 in our trials, and they were all fabulous. And they liked a more shady spot in our trials, so we kind of moved them. But they were huge. They were like, the leaves were probably 2 foot across, and the plants were like 5 foot tall, like just big, really great plants. We also had some fabulous begonias. Like begonias are hot right now as like a sunshade plant. So we had a lot of those. We had some really good perennials. One of the perennials I love, and I've been giving it a lot of airtime, is it's a eupatorium, and that's a Joe Pye weed. But we think of Joe Pye weed as this big, giant, like 6 foot tall plant, takes up a lot of space. And this one is called Little Joe, and it's from Duke Orange, and it's so cute, and it's tiny. Actually, it's coming out. We've had it for 3 years. It's only like 3 foot tall. It's perfect. It is so good. And actually, I'm super excited because one of the greenhouses I know, they actually called, and they were like, "Who sells that?" They're like, "We need to get that in our program." So that was a really good one. We also had really great Rudbeckias. So think like annual black-eyed Susans. I think we had 24 of them, and they were all good. It didn't matter what breeder it was. They all performed really, really well. So they would be great for growers who are like, oh, we need like something to put in our mums, or, with our mums. Yeah. So those were all really good. And then Coleus, we had lots of Coleus, and every Coleus was fabulous.
Nice. I'm kind of excited about the Little Joe. My neighbors have a Joe Pye bush, and it is gigantic, like you said, and definitely not something I could do in my garden with my space, but I like the little white flowers, and so maybe Little Joe might be coming to my house this year.
Yeah, I know. Well, I live in an urban, we live in the city of Easton, so we have a tiny, we don't have like acres. We have a small yard, and I always am like trying to find small versions of things. Like we also have a small version of Russian sage. We have actually a couple. And they don't get to be these big wild monsters. They kind of stay nice and compact. And I'm like, oh, I need to upgrade and get rid of my old ones and bring some of those in. So yeah.
All right. So what are you excited about seeing for the floral trials for this coming year?
I did just take a peek at the lists yesterday. We're starting to get our breeder lists in, and it does look like we're going to have some really good combinations, which I love combos, because it's like there's kind of 2 schools of thought in combination baskets. So think like hanging baskets and big porch patios. Some breeders will send us like a kind of a bigger plug with the different things in it. Like, so maybe it has a Angelonia and a Calabricoa and something else in there in that one plug. But then some breeders will send us recipes. So they're like, okay, you need these 3 plants and they go in this order. So I happened to take a peek at the catalog and I was like, oh, some of those are really good.
Yeah.
The cool thing is sometimes that they're not on the market yet. Sometimes they don't even have a name. Like we had some last year that were really good and they didn't have a name. This year I saw them in the catalog and they do have a name. So that means that they will be out and available for purchase.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you guys trial combinations like that. I thought it was just the flowers. So that's interesting to know.
Oh, you guys should come out in the summertime and see what we have. It's have either of you been to the flower
Yeah.
trials?
I was there once.
I've been there a couple times for like events, but I'm such a sucker for pretty flowers. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to go and just look at everything.
Little road trip.
Yeah. You've obviously been working in the floriculture industry for a few years now. So what are some changes you've seen in the industry over the years?
I've seen some consolidation of bigger growers because, the next generation is retiring. I've also seen, which is kind of cool, is like these smaller plant shops opening and like people selling at farmers markets and just a different way to sell plants. And I think that's kind of cool too, because it's bringing more plants to the masses. The other thing I've seen that's really interesting is the trends of plants. Like what are we buying? What are we selling? What are people looking for, right? So houseplants are big.
Yeah.
Everybody loves houseplants. But I've noticed recently, over probably the last 2.5 years, houseplants moving outside. So being like fillers for patio planters or being a standalone something, outside for the season. Like we had a really great like a lot of the begonias we have, like the old school, like Rex begonias, we have those, but we have new ones and they're awesome. And they're just foliage plants. But, back in the 70s and the 80s, they were house plants, but now they're outside and doing really great things. So that's really what I'm seeing. I'm also seeing this like millennial. So I always tell people I'm a millennial and I'll own it. I hate to deadhead plants. So I've seen, our parents and our grandparents had always bought geraniums for their front porch, right? Everybody always had geraniums on their front porch. They bought them in a 4-inch pot. I don't see millennials. Like when I walk around our neighborhood, I see people with pots on their porches or plants in their gardens, but I don't see geraniums that much anymore, unless it's at an older family's house or an older couple's house. And I've seen kind of that trend of breeders not pushing out as many geraniums now, or they're pushing like the kind of the more self-cleaning ones. We don't want a deadhead, so that's kind of cool. And it's pretty awesome to see that happening and the trend of where plants are going. And maybe we'll come back to that at some point.
It's funny that you mentioned trends because that leads right into what I was going to ask you next. And, we live in such a society where there are trends come and go very quickly sometimes, and it can be hard to keep up. So how is it for growers to keep up with consumer trends? Like, is it really tough for them? Because obviously plants and flowers are not, you can't just immediately, if someone wants a flower, hand it to them. It takes planning and growing.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard. So I think that growers are, they're looking and they're watching. There's a lot of groups out there that are looking at trends and plant trends and trying to forecast what the consumer is going to want in the future. We saw coming out of like during the COVID time, that's when houseplants got really big because everybody was home, right? And then that summer, plant sales were insane in 2020 and 2021 because everybody was home and they wanted to make their gardens look really great and they wanted to make their yards look really great. And now people are kind of forecasting this like into like small homesteading, right? Like, so folks want vegetable plants and they want small trees and dwarf tree fruits and tiny bushes that have blueberries or really great herb gardens. And that's kind of where I think things are going to go. But we'll see. It is really interesting though. So nice. if you read like a lot of the trade magazines will put that out, they'll say, oh, these are like the forecasted trends for, 2025.
That's interesting. I never thought about like plant trends like that, but it makes sense. Yeah. So we're going to pivot a little. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about all the math that we wind up doing during the day. And you mentioned some math regarding plant nutrition. And I wanted to ask, what's a common mistake that you see people making in their home gardens regarding plant nutrition?
Not feeding at all.
I can be guilty of that.
Yeah, same.
That's a
I'll
really
admit
big
it.
one, actually. That is a really big one. I always joke that a lot of times homeowners forget to water. So they're definitely not going to remember to feed their plants. That's a big one. The number two that I see is they'll go and they'll look at something and they don't really understand what those numbers mean on the fertilizer, right? So like the nitrogen, and then also not just the nitrogen, but the nitrogen breakdown and what does that do for the plant? And sometimes I think that when people do finally feed their plants, they're like, oh, well, if some is good, more is better. And then they just dump a bunch of nitrogen on and then like on tomato plants, right? So they'll feed their tomatoes tons and tons of nitrogen, and then they don't get any tomatoes because the plant is huge and it's gorgeous and it's lush, but it's too vegetative and they're not getting any fruit set. So that's probably the biggest thing I see besides not feeding plants.
Gotcha. Okay. So you've also had your hand in some hydroponic gardening. And I just want to ask, what are some new innovations in hydroponic gardening that you find particularly interesting?
I love that it's like becoming more mainstream and that there's these small growers who are doing it. Like I love when like a little like a greenhouse or a farm is like, we think we might want to do some hydroponic stuff. And then they're kind of moving into that shift of, trying to provide lettuce and greens all over the place. Locally. So we're not shipping it from Arizona or from California or things like that. There is some really cool stuff happening though, of like in the vertical farming trend and in urban farming. I will say I've been following vertical farming for a very long time, and I think it's great, but I also think that we're not going to feed the world's hungry with it, right? Because we're growing lettuce or we're growing $8 strawberries. So it's cool, but it's not super cool in that respect. But I do think like some of these smaller, really urban farms who are trying to, maybe they're feeding food pantries, right? Or, a college farm. I think where like hydroponic stuff is awesome. I will say though, hydroponic strawberries, I am a big fan of getting to see that happening. Like I've watched it for many years, many years happening in Asia, and then coming here and researchers working on it. And now it's here. Actually, one of my students, I used to teach at Del Val as a hydroponics professor, and one of my students is working at an indoor vertical farm growing strawberries. And I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. So
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but do you think hydroponics, I mean, right now it is a relatively, I guess, small sector within agriculture. And, do you see the industry getting to the point where it has an effect on the ag industry as a whole? Or do you think it's going to kind of stay in those like smaller scale?
I think it's going to stay in those smaller scales. Now there are some really big hydroponic companies out there like Bright Farms and Gotham Greens, but they're growing in, traditional greenhouse spaces hydroponically, which is fabulous. But those warehouse ones where they're, bringing in HVAC and lighting, those are difficult. And those are the ones that are kind of struggling. I don't know if it will ever be big enough to like really upset, the tomato industry or the lettuce industry. But I think it has its, it can ruffle some feathers here for sure. Like in our area, the mid-Atlantic where, maybe folks aren't going to grow as much lettuce out in the field anymore, which we don't really grow that much to begin with.
In our area in the Mid-Atlantic here at the paper, we cover a lot about farmland and warehouses booming and development and stuff like that. So do you think hydroponics could become more of a almost necessity as farmland shrinks in certain areas?
I think so. I mean, you can grow a lot of crop in a small area and hydroponic and turn it very, very quickly. Like lettuce is a fast crop anyway. But I mean, lettuce hydroponically, you can grow in 6 weeks.
Oh,
Turn a
wow.
crop, and if you have a continuous, cycle going, I mean, you can support a lot of restaurants and a lot of businesses very, very fast. And I do have a couple growers, not just here in the Mid-Atlantic, but a couple other places that are, they're expanding their hydroponic lettuce operations. They did other farming. Maybe they still do crop farming too, but they're like, we see this market where we're at, and they're, kind of capitalizing on it. So.
Yeah. So it could be like almost like a value added type of thing on top of what you're already doing.
Exactly. Yes.
What advice would you have for people who might be interested in exploring hydroponic gardening at home?
Oh, so at home, there is some really cool things that you can, like little small hydroponic setups that you can purchase. And really the biggest thing you have to remember when you're hydroponic gardening, not gardening in soil, is you have to give it all of the food it needs and all of the light it needs, especially if you're going to be inside. So, making sure that you have some supplemental lighting. And the other thing is making sure that you buy good quality, like hydroponic nutrients. Now, a lot of hydroponic nutrients are kind of geared towards the recreational market for cannabis and things like that. So you really want to kind of look at those and say, well, those products are great for that market, but they're not really great to grow basil and lettuce and herbs in your kitchen. So, you kind of have to look for those out there. And there are ones for sale and things like that. There's some really cool like countertop hydroponic and like ones that go like grow chambers that like go under your cabinet and yeah, it looks like a wine fridge kind of.
Huh. That's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, it doesn't have to be like big and high tech. Right now, I have some hydroponic lettuce research going on, and they're actually in dish tubs. Like I went to the restaurant store.
Yeah.
Well, my original float beds got lost in shipping. So my plants had arrived and I was like, what am I going to do? So I went to the restaurant store and I bought dish tubs and I just cut the float beds for them. And I can grow 5 heads of lettuce in 6 weeks in these little float beds. And I just keep adding fertilizer and they're happy. So.
Wow. That's really interesting. I don't know if I'm like quite ready to like step up to hydroponic gardening, but like, you know what? It's not out of the realm of possibilities, I think.
It doesn't sound as scary as you would think it does.
Yeah.
No, and I will say, I know a lot of people, and I had one for like a long, long time ago, like 15 years ago. I had an arrow garden, and that's kind of like the gateway into that. And I think that they still make them, and there are similar products out there that you could grow like a basil, a parsley, maybe a little lettuce or something on your countertop. And it's totally self-contained.
I love that. And I feel like as, like you mentioned, like the homesteading trend continues to grow. And, even for people who might not be ready to like, get the chicken coop, maybe hydroponic gardening could be, their way in.
And I see so many people like cooking much better meals these days, or, very into that like craft cocktail or craft mocktail, making fancy drinks. I mean, and like you can easily grow your herbs and your garnishes for that.
Maybe I'm going to have to do some more hydroponic research because I'm so intrigued about the thought of like just growing something in my kitchen. Why not?
Yeah.
Settling down for your cocktail, grabbing a little sprig of something or other.
My little sprig.
Yeah.
Garnish my drink.
Yeah,
watch some TV. Yeah.
I love that for you. All right, so that brings us to the end of our questions, except for one, and it's the one we always end on. So what does being a woman in ag mean to you?
That is a great question.
I know, it's the big one.
We always save the big one for last.
Honestly, I think sometimes still it means being a really great role model and a trailblazer for the younger generation. So I've been in this industry for about 20 years now, and until recently, I was always the youngest at the table. I was one of the few females at the table. And, most of my mentors that I was looking up to were these older guys who had been here forever, and I'm like, man, I'm tired of this. Like, I want the younger generation to be in. And then when I was teaching at Del Val, and I remember seeing, like, I would get more girls in my class every year. And I was like, oh gosh, this is so good. And now I see them out doing great things in the world. And I just hope that I can be a better mentor to these young females coming in than even my guy mentors were to me. Not, they were fabulous, but they don't always get what it's like, right? To be a woman in ag as a minority with a family and kids and all of that. So, showing this younger generation that it is possible, and it's okay to be the only girl at the table, and it's okay to be a little loud about it too, So
Awesome. All right. Well, Krystal, thank you for stopping by the farmhouse today. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
thank you. I had a lot of fun.
All right, so that was Krystal Snyder, and it was a joy to talk to her. I feel like I'm incredibly inspired to gear up for this year's garden. I forget who says this to me, but there's a saying that next year's garden will be my greatest garden. And it instills a sense of hope that I try to hang on to every year. And I feel that with Krystal's wisdom, I'm more prepared than ever.
Yeah, I think every year I say this is my year to like really rock a garden, and I normally am not correct, but who knows? Maybe this really is my year. And maybe if I am struggling so much with a traditional vegetable garden, maybe I should try a hydroponic something. Like maybe just a little bit of lettuce so I can have my own lettuce for salads I bring to lunch or something like that. Maybe, I don't know. I think I'm going to do a little bit of research and see what happens.
I love this idea. I would be your biggest cheerleader. As she was telling us about, indoor hydroponic plants in people's houses, I was like sitting there racking my brain to think, where would I put that in my house? And I'm really not sure where it would work out for us. We've got a dog, we've got 2 kids, and I just have visions of the whole thing being knocked over or like baby toys being thrown into it. And I don't know if it's in the cards for me, at least in the immediate future.
Well, if I have raving success with my hydroponic lettuce growing that I may or may not actually try, I can bring you some lettuce. If it's ready in 6 weeks, like that's no time at all. So.
I love that. We could be having salads in 2 months.
So I don't know. You know what? To all of our listeners, if I actually legitimately start trying some hydroponics, I'll keep you all updated, just in case. We'll see if it's a success story. We'll see what happens.
Fingers crossed. So moving on, we are now 3 episodes into Farmer Wants a Wife, which we cover on lancasterfarming.com. You can go pretty much every Friday morning after a new episode airs Thursday evening and get to hear Steph's and my takes on it, as well as the opinions of a few other staff members here. But we thought we'd take some time to talk about it here as well.
Yeah, so 3 episodes down. I'm not sure exactly how many are going to be in season 2, but I think season 1 had like 11. So
it was an odd number.
I would think it'll be the same. So we have a good chunk to go, but we already have a lot of thoughts. Lot of thoughts. So
we can go through the farmers, but just to start things off, do you have a favorite farmer, Steph?
I'm very much on Team Nathan at the moment. He is the youngest farmer. He's only 23, which to me is a little insane to be on a dating show. I feel like, which I said this in one of my things too, one of my written things on lancasterfarming.com. I'm like, you live in Florida, you're a good-looking 23-year-old guy. Like, just go out to a bar.
How hard could it be?
Download a dating app. Like, I feel like you have other options. I don't know if you need to be on reality TV at this point. But he also seems really sweet, so I like him.
Okay.
I think I know who your favorite is.
It hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I clocked him immediately. It's Ty. He is the oldest farmer. He's 42, which is not old. But he has a jaw like Superman, and he is a roper, and he had a little moment in the last episode where he was teaching the women who are living with him how to rope. And I said this in my thoughts online that kudos to like the sound department behind the scenes at Farmer Wants a Wife, because they found some music that was like the knockoff version of Unchained Melody from Ghost. And like the way he was holding these women as he was showing them how to rope, it was a real like kind of like at the pottery wheel moment. And I was a little taken by it.
I will say, anytime Ty wears a backwards baseball hat, I'm like, yeah, I see it.
You get it. So, I mean, I guess speaking of Ty, do you want to start with him and his ladies, what our thoughts are there? Do you have a favorite match for him?
I'm going to blank on her name. Is it Brooke? The one who she just seems super secure. Like, she basically told him in episode 3, don't pick me for the solo date. Pick someone who you don't have a connection with to see if it can grow. Like, she's like, I know we have a connection. I know we could be good together. Yeah. And I'm like, girl, I mean, I forget how old she is. She's definitely in her 30s. So I'm 28. So I'm like, I really hope that my personal like security grows more, because I'm like, that's what I want to be. I want to be as secure as Brooke. That was impressive.
I will say, as someone who is Brooke's age, I would not be able to do that. I mean, hats off to her, because, yeah, that was a really bold move and it made her look really good.
Yeah. So I would love to hopefully see them get some solo time together, because I do feel like they have a connection.
Okay. How about Mitchell? We had some thoughts about him just from the get-go, because his bio that was presented ahead of the show was kind of questionable. It was we had a hard time figuring out what kind of farming he actually did, if any at all.
I still don't have an answer to that. Like, we're 3 episodes in and I'm like, is he a homesteader? What is he doing? Like,
unclear.
I don't know.
He lives in a creepy cabin in the woods, and I don't see a farm anywhere near him.
Yeah, I don't know what he was planting raised beds at one point, but it was like not enough to like sustain an income. And so I don't know. I actually, after episode 1, I picked him as my favorite online. And now I'm like, no, there's just something about him. At first I thought like, oh, he's such a smooth talker. Like, you know, that's such a, you know, it's so cute when he's all like flirty. And now I'm like, no, he just sounds kind of fake to me.
Too smooth.
Yeah, he's a little too smooth. I'm like, what are you looking for, man? Because I don't know. Do you want a wife or do you want a hired hand to plant your raised beds? Yeah. I don't know. I need more from him.
He did have one of my favorite moments of the last episode, though, when they were chopping wood, and he gave the heaviest, largest piece of wood to probably the weakest girl who wound up being eliminated later, and he just kind of laughed as she struggled like to hold it. Yeah. I mean, it was a little mean-spirited, but I thought it was kind of funny.
I find, like, anytime he's on camera, I find him entertaining, but I don't know if I like him or hate him. Like, I have no idea yet. So
it's a thin line.
Yeah, I need more time with him.
What about Nathan, who we know you do love?
My fave. I also don't know. Like, I feel like we also haven't gotten a huge amount of time to get to know Nathan either. Because, like, in episode 2, he was supposed to have his first solo date and she had to leave because of a family emergency. So we never got to, like, really see him too much compared to the other farmers. But I don't know. He just seems so sweet. And, like, even though he is 23, which, again, that's so young, he seems pretty mature for 23.
He's an old 23. And just because of what he's gone through in his life, his father died when he was very young. And it seems like he was kind of thrust into being the man of the house. He seems like a nice guy. His farm is probably the farm I would most want to spend time on. He is a citrus farmer in Florida. However, I will note that one of our coworkers is pushing for one of the women to get eaten by an alligator because he is so bored watching this show. Hopefully that doesn't happen.
I will say there was a moment in episode 2 where Nathan took his ladies to do their like farm work in the orchard. And I was so convinced that like a woman would go to like spray behind a bush or something and an alligator would just like pop out. I was like,
or
it was
a snake.
Like, yeah, I'm like, jump scares are about to happen. Because there was, in season 1, there was a snake jump scare the one episode. So you never know. It's Florida.
There are pythons down there. Okay, so last we have Brandon, who his group of women are the ones that are really bringing the drama this season, which is both a blessing and a curse, I guess.
Yeah. Brandon himself seems fine. Like,
yeah,
I don't have strong opinions about him either way.
No.
He's a potato farmer, and you guys, our listeners, probably don't know this, but Candace is well aware that I love a potato. So, like, you know, he has some points in my book just because he's a potato farmer, but...
That's how we're going to grade all of your potential suitors from now on. What do you farm and how tasty is it? So Brandon has 2 particular women in his group, Reba and Joy. And Reba really does not like Joy. She thinks she's very fake and phony. And Joy just is trying to, I think, live her life. She's a very joyous person.
Yeah.
She does smile a lot, which apparently is fake, according to Reba. And they kind of got into it last episode. So, Steph, are you Team Reba or Team Joy?
I am Team Joy. I will say, like, you guys really need to watch the show. It'll make so much more sense. But some of her outfit choices
are everything to me.
Like, she looks incredible, but I was like, honey, why? Like, stilettos, a fur hat, like, just please watch. That was episode 2 where she really like rocked the outfits.
Yeah.
So there was definitely part of me that was like, okay, what are we doing? But her personality is joy for sure. Like, so I think Reba's just being mean. I like.
Agreed.
She says she's just being real. I put air quotes around that because she did say those words, but obviously you guys can't see me. But like being real and being mean,
Not the same
two
thing.
very different things.
Yeah, I think there's only one correct response to the question, and that is to be Team Joy, because Reba she has lost herself in this. And yeah, I don't think Joy is right for the farm. Her hair is glorious every week, just feathered and gigantic, and I love it. But I don't see her enjoying life on the farm.
Yeah, and honestly, it seems like everyone in our office that's watching the show, which there's a solid, what?
6 of us? 7?
Seven of us watching it every week. And I'm pretty sure everybody is Team Joy. So
yeah,
we'll see what happens if Reba can redeem herself. We'll see.
Well, there's a new episode that will be airing tonight. It's always at 9:00 on Thursdays on Fox. And yeah, then on Friday, come and join us over at lancasterfarming.com to see our reactions to it. And I think that wraps up our show for this week.
Yeah. Also, if you don't have cable, it does stream on Hulu the next day, so you do have options.
All right, well, that wraps it up for us. If you want to reach us, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com. And
so yeah, thanks for listening to this episode of The Farmhouse. We love to have you along with us. I am Stephanie Spiker.
I'm Candace Worzbowski.
And we will talk to you guys next week.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Worzbowski and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you've been hearing throughout the episode is brought to you by Tin Bird Shadow.